Hi, and welcome back to Geology. This is Miss Sparks, and we are continuing our discussion about radioactive decay. And this is a part of our absolute age dating or absolute age of rocks. So we are in the unit of history of the Earth, and previously we've talked about the relative age of rocks and just being able to figure out the law of superposition, which states older rocks are on the bottom, younger rocks are on the top. And then we're moving into a more definite way in figuring out how old a rock layer or a section of rocks or a fossil is. And that's going to be our absolute age of rocks. And so we kind of talked about the idea of rate of erosion, rate of deposition, and then our VARB counting, which are all really great. However, we are going to take a really definite look in at radioactive decay and how we can use the principles of a half-life to kind of figure out exactly how old a certain rock layer is due to the elements that are present in there. And so we're kind of going back to way back at the beginning of our first unit where we talked about rocks and minerals, and that minerals are made out of elements and elements are made out of protons, neutrons, and electrons. And so that's going to kind of come back into play the next couple of days as we kind of navigate through this radioactive decay. And so it is important to make sure you get out a sheet of paper and take some notes. This is from our previous discussion where we just talked about the idea that there are certain types of nuclei or neutrons that are housed within the nucleus of a element, and that sometimes they can be used as a natural clock, meaning that as they move on in time, they become unstable and will release a particle back out into the environment. And as it does that, it changes the isotope or the atomic mass of that element, and it becomes slightly different, and scientists are able to use that to figure out exactly how old a rock is. And so that's what we're going to kind of discuss today. So radioactive isotopes have a nuclei that emit particles and energy at a constant rate. We're going to talk about what that constant rate is today. And as an atom emits particles and energy, it changes into a different isotope. And so let's just kind of talk about, there we go, the ideas of what this looks like in science. So uranium is a great example of a radioactive element, meaning that this is one that we can use quite a bit to kind of figure out exactly how old certain rock layers are. Uranium is actually what is used in our nuclear power plants. There's several great shows, actually one that I watched recently called Chernobyl, which maybe you've learned of in a history class, where this is probably the most catastrophic nuclear power plant meltdown, to the point where we still as humans cannot go and live in the area where Chernobyl is, where the radioactive nuclear power plant is, because there's so much energy that is still being released. It would be way too harmful for humans to live there. So anyway, let's get back to this. So the whole point of that is that uranium is what was used in the power plant. So uranium is a radioactive isotope found in many rocks. It's actually very common. It is a large element, and so therefore it has lots of protons, lots of electrons, and lots of neutrons. So it's easy to be able to count those protons, neutrons, and electrons, those subatomic particles. So uranium U-238 is very useful in determining the absolute age of a rock. It emits 2 neutrons in a process known as radioactive decay. And as it does this, this changes the element to TH234, which is also radioactive. And then this TH234 will release more neutrons in order for it to become something else. Uranium is going to decay and decay and decay and decay all the way down until it becomes very stable. And in that point, it has then transferred into the element lead. And so we'll kind of talk about that. So one of the big terms we're going to discuss here is the idea of radioactive decay or radioactive elements have something, what is called a half-life. And so I want you to kind of think of this as you have the original element. We normally refer that to as the parent element, and it's going to decay down into the daughter element, meaning that as the parent element releases the neutrons back out into the environment or releases that energy back out, it decays down that half-life into a daughter element. So you always still have the parent element. It's just that you are releasing that neutron to almost change into another element, but you can always have a half of a half of a half of a half. So that parent element is always still going to be there. It's just that the decay might start off really fast and then it might go slower and slower and slower. And I'll discuss what that means here in a few minutes. So the decay of radioactive uranium-238 is a stable element, occurs as a very slow rate, meaning that once again, it's going to release neutrons out very slow, and scientists are able to kind of use that to count. The rate, however, is constant, and that's the important thing, is that it's always constant, not affected by temperature, pressure, other environmental conditions. It is just that it is like a clock, and it's going to say every 10,000 years, bloop, I'm going to release a neutron. Another 10,000 years passes, bloop, I'm going to release another neutron. So it's that idea that it kind of just keeps going over. Why we call it half-life? Half-life is the time it takes for half the mass of the given amount of a radioactive element to decay into its daughter element. So there's that parent and daughter. Let me read that again. That's really, really important to understand. Half-life is the time it takes for half the mass of a given amount of radioactive element to decay into the daughter element. Uranium would be the parent, lead would be the daughter, and however amount of time that half-life is. So the mass is going, it's not disappearing, it's just transferring. So you might think back when you were in integrated science and you talked about the law of conservation of energy, that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's just transferred back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That is exactly what's happening here, is that the energy is being transferred into another element to change it. Or you could also think about the law of conservation of mass, is that the mass is still there, it's just being converted from one to the other. So by comparing these amounts, scientists can determine the age of an actual rock. That half-life is really, really, really important. So we use uranium quite a bit. That is one of the big ones we'll talk about. The other one is carbon. Carbon is really important with helping us figure out the age of living things. So all living organisms are made out of carbon. Well, carbon-14 also can be broken down over and over and over again. And so and that brings us to some of our organic cycles that we have here on Earth, is that carbon can be broken down into nitrogen. So let's talk about this. So some of the more recently formed geologic samples contain organic material. So, and we'll talk about this even more when we get into the history of the Earth. But the geologic time period of Cambrian is when organic material started to form. So from Cambrian all the way up to our Holocene, which is where we are living in right now, there has been organic material, and we're able to use that carbon to figure out how old the organic material is. So organic materials, the remains of once living things, and that can be coal, that could be an actual fossil. I showed you a video last week of the frozen dog. There's been several other organisms that have been found like that have been just kind of capsules in time that are made up of carbon. So to determine the age of these samples, scientists use a form of radioactive carbon, or carbon-14. And so what happens is carbon-14 decays from it to form the daughter element nitrogen-14. So carbon is slowly losing its neutrons, and as it does that, it turns into carbon. And if you've had biology, you can probably think of those two terms. These are two organic chemicals or elements that are really, really important in the process of keeping the earth very stable. We need both carbon and nitrogen cycles to continue on so we can see these healthy cycles in our environment. And so we're going to kind of take a look at what this actually looks like as we move forward. So hopefully this was helpful, and we're going to look at how to do the math behind this.